Hello everyone, my name is Aaron and I'm a botanical watercolor artist. Today I'm working on a painting of this orchid. This is Chysis limminghei. It's an orchid species from Mexico and I think Guatemala. I've been growing it for a little while now and this is the first time it's bloomed for me. So you get a nice look at the flowers there. The flowers are really interesting and waxy, and then it has these bulbs, pseudobulbs, and very thin leaves. So it's a really unusual orchid. It's a lot different from anything else that I'm growing or that I've really seen. So definitely something interesting and different to paint. In addition to the live plant reference, I have a photo that I took, and this is what the orchid looked like when I bought it. So it has these big explosions of leaves that come from these pseudobulbs, and then when it gets drier, it drops the leaves and the pseudobulbs remain behind. So what I want to do in my painting is portray it with more leaves than what it has right now, just so I have a fuller composition and have a better representation of what the plant looks like when it's happy rather than what it looks like right now. So basically I'm just going to combine the live reference with a photo reference. So sometimes I paint from live, sometimes I paint from photos, and sometimes I do a little bit of both. I went ahead and did some sketching and trying to figure out how to combine my larger section of leaves with my live reference here. And what I've got is a very rough sketch like this with the spray of leaves above, and then this plant tends to kind of hang and droop a little bit. The flowers kind of hang below. So the flowers are going to be more in the bottom corner of the composition. So that's my loose composition that I'm working with. Okay, so even though I should probably spend a lot more time in the sketchbook, really planning this drawing out ahead of time, I have a tendency to want to just go right in on my watercolor paper and do the drawing directly. So I'm going to go ahead and start on that using my little rough sketch here as a guide of generally where the elements fall. So now that I've got a rough sketch of the leaves where I want them, I'm working on the flowers, and I've got to use my left hand to hold them facing me, where kind of in position where I want them to be, and then with my right hand sketch them in. So first I'm going to just draw a very rough shape for positioning. Got the one flower facing us and then another one that's going to be just off to the side here below it. Once I'm happy with this composition, I just need to refine it and use my eraser to redraw all the lines much more tight to my reference, and especially put a lot more detail into the flower. I know this is supposed to be a painting video and not necessarily a drawing video, but I always want to show as much of the drawing as I can. It's just a super important part of my process, and I couldn't do the types of realistic paintings that I do without a solid foundation of a drawing beforehand. And sometimes that drawing process can take quite a bit of time to get it just right. Compositionally, things like flowers always look better in odd numbers, sets of 3 rather than pairs of 2. So while my subject only has 2 flowers, this plant often will have more. So I'm going to go ahead and add a third flower coming off here and kind of in profile. And I can just use my plant in front of me and look at it from the side and add a third flower. So now with the drawing complete, I'm going to go ahead and start with my first layers of paint. And that's just going to be a very light wash of a bright green color. I'm going to use a mix of yellow and a cobalt turquoise to make a very light, vibrant green. And of course, we want to use a lot of water for our first layers of paint. These leaves are very thin and have a kind of pleated surface and parallel veins running lengthwise. We're going to follow the direction of the veins lengthwise down the leaf, and I want to make sure to leave some white of the paper to create the sense of highlights. So what I'm really trying to think about here is not so much even the color or the detail or anything like that, but bringing in a sense of light and establishing that early on. So for this leaf, as it falls down towards the center, it gets darker and a little warmer. And then up here in the highlight portion, I'm going to use a bit more blue and create that highlight. And then leave it white. And then back to green here. And then there's a little piece of the leaf that folds under, and that's warmer. So just something very simple like that, creating a wash, letting it dry, and instantly we have a sense of a leaf folding up towards the light. And we're just going to do that for each leaf on the painting. Now these old leafless pseudobulbs have some papery remnants of the old leaves on them, so they're not going to be totally green. And that's something that I need to consider. Now with the flowers, I'm not going to be quite as loose as I was with the leaves to begin with. And I'm going to start by basically painting the shadows, because the flowers have a white base with some purple or pinkish tones on top. What I need to do is establish a sense of light and shadow on these very waxy flowers. Now that I've got a base layer of very light paint over the whole piece, I'm going to go ahead and start working up my layers a little bit darker and a little bit more detailed with a smaller brush. Again, I want to follow the veins with my brush strokes, and a lot of times for me it helps to rotate the painting around so I can get a more comfortable angle on certain brush strokes. So now with just basically 2 layers of paint, I've got a really nice impressionistic look and a good start on these leaves, which I will continue to revisit and push a little bit farther with the detail, but it's definitely a good start that I'm happy with. And we will go back to adding more detail and color into the flowers now. Now that I have a few base tones down on the flowers, I'm going to go ahead and start right in on the fine details and some of the intricate parts of this flower. These flowers are very thick, and they feel like, you know, a succulent plant. They're very waxy, so it's something that you wouldn't necessarily be able to see from a photo, but we're going to try to be sure to capture that feeling in the painting. So I'm going to take some yellow, and I'm not sure what the technical term for these are, but they look like teeth. It's one of the focal points of the whole painting, those yellow teeth. So I'm going to paint those. And then I'm also going to go ahead and add a little bit of color onto the lip. Now I just want to carefully erase my pencil lines as long as the painting is dry, and replace them with painted sections. And now on the back of the throat there's this speckled pattern. And since the rest of this is dry, we can go ahead and define these little tooth-like structures. And those kind of lead down onto the lip. Okay, now I think I'm going to go ahead and add that peachy tone, that pink tone to the petals and sepals. So because I've already done all of the shadows on the white parts of the petals, I can just paint this directly in on top of the shadows, and it already has that sense of depth. Now that this flower is looking pretty good, I want to go back and readdress my leaves for a bit. I'm going to mostly erase the pencil lines and start to bring more definition into especially this lower section of leaves. Trying to bring more of that three-dimensional look to these flowers so that the petals don't look as flat and they look more thick and waxy. So I'm doing that by adding more depth to the shadows. I also want to pay very close attention to some of the edges where you can see how thick these petals are, and the edges fold over just a little bit. One part that I need to do some more work on are these 3 older leafless pseudobulbs. And I'm going to go in with a green color and try to give the impression of a round shape that these have. And I can do that both with the shading and the color, but I also want to make sure that I pay attention to how cylindrical and round these are, and they have these horizontal bands where the old leaf bases were. So I want to make sure that I draw those in a way that gives the sense of the round shape of these structures. So I want to try to capture the papery texture of these thin sheaths that are stuck on these old bulbs. Another thing that's kind of interesting about this orchid is that the roots, if I take a look here, are sort of fuzzy. So a unique feature like those fuzzy roots is definitely something that I want to try to capture the impression of in my watercolor. And I can do that with some little brush strokes and just try to give the impression of fuzziness. And the reason I'm doing the roots in this arrangement is because this is an epiphyte. It's a plant that grows on trees. So I'm kind of picturing it growing off of the side of a tree, an invisible tree that we can't see or that I'm not painting. So the roots are sort of spreading out, going off to one side here, and some of them are even going up rather than down because they are growing up along the bark of the tree rather than down into the soil. And in addition to the detailed lines for the veins that I'm painting on these leaves, I can also do some light washes on top that will add depth and the sense of light and shadow. Just like the initial washes that I did, do some of that on top near the end. A lot of times a wash like this on especially something that's glossy and smooth like a leaf can help even out your texture. And moving on to our remaining 2 flowers, we want to add that nice blush tone that the back of the petals have. I want to keep in mind that because of this really waxy texture, there's some really nice highlights that we want to preserve with the white of the paper. So I'm not going to go too heavy with this color at first. And now, as always, the final stage of every painting just involves a lot of fine detail work and finishing touches. I'm using one of my smallest round brushes for this, and just making sure I take my time and really look closely at my subject so that I don't miss any of the details. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with how this painting's looking. I think I'm going to leave it there. Here's the Chysis limminghei painting and the plant. If you like this one, check out my website. The link's in the description, and I've got prints of this and all my other paintings there. If you want to see what I paint next, go ahead and subscribe to the channel and follow what I'm working on. Thanks for watching.